August 15th, 1947. A huge day for India, right? The day it finally gained independence. But that day of celebration was also marked by an immense tragedy. The day the country was split in two, creating India and Pakistan. Now, this didn't just happen overnight. It was really the final chapter in a story that started decades earlier, all in a single province, Bengal.
So how did this happen? What was the chain of events that took communities that had lived side by side for centuries and led them to separate? Well, that's what we're going to do here. We're going to trace that path, step by step, from a single political decision in Bengal all the way to new borders being drawn right across the subcontinent. We've broken this whole story down into 5 key parts. We'll kick things off with the very first seeds of division back in 1905, then see how separate politics became official. We'll look at a really confusing time of both unity and unrest, analyze the critical political turning point, and then finally walk through those last, fateful steps that made partition a reality. Okay, so our story kicks off around 1904 with the Viceroy of India, Lord Curzon. He was about to make a decision that, on the surface, seemed like just a simple administrative tweak, but it would end up changing the course of Indian history forever. So here's how it played out super quickly. In 1904, Curzon makes the proposal. By 1905, it's done. Bengal is split. But the backlash, the protests were so huge that by 1911, the British were actually forced to reverse the decision. But the thing is, by then, the damage was already done. Okay, so this is where things get really interesting, this clash of narratives. The official British line was that this was all about administrative efficiency. They just said Bengal was way too big to govern effectively. Simple as that. But for so many Indians, the real motive was crystal clear. This was a classic divide-and-rule tactic. They believed it was deliberately engineered to create a Hindu-majority West Bengal and a Muslim-majority East Bengal, basically to stir up religious division and weakening the growing nationalist movement. And the reaction? It was immediate, and it was deeply divided. Protests just erupted everywhere. This is when we see the birth of the Swadeshi and boycott movement, which was a massive call for Indians to use their own locally made goods and to boycott British products. In West Bengal, many Hindus saw this partition as a deep insult, like cutting their motherland in two. But over in the poor East Bengal, many Muslims actually supported it. They hoped that a new Muslim-majority province would finally give them a chance to thrive, free from the economic grip of Calcutta's powerful Hindu business class. You can see it right there. The lines were being drawn. So, even though the Bengal partition was eventually rolled back, you can't just unring a bell, right? The seeds of division it had planted were starting to sprout. And in this next phase, we're going to see how those divisions got formally baked into India's political system. All right, this next part is a total game changer. It's the introduction of something called separate electorates in 1909. So what does that mean? Basically, it meant that in certain areas, only Muslim voters could vote for Muslim candidates. This was a huge demand from the All India Muslim League, which had just formed a few years earlier in 1906. And with this one act, you essentially created separate political lanes based entirely on religion. Now, let's jump forward to 1916. In an effort to create a united front against the British, the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League get together for a joint session. But to get that unity, Congress made a really historic concession. They officially accepted the idea of separate electorates. This was a massive turning point. It basically gave the Muslim League the legitimacy it wanted as the main political voice for India's Muslims. And it made politics based on religion totally mainstream. So the years that followed were, well, they were a total paradox. On one hand, you had this incredible moment of Hindu-Muslim unity. But it was followed almost immediately by some of the worst communal violence the country had ever seen, and the birth of a brand new, really radical idea. From 1919 to 22, under Gandhi's leadership, you had this amazing golden period where the Khilafat and non-cooperation movements brought Hindus and Muslims together like never before. But then, in 1922, Gandhi suddenly called off the movement, and that unity just shattered. The frustration that followed saw religious divisions come roaring back. And it was in this chaotic climate that the two-nation theory really started to take hold. This idea that Hindus and Muslims weren't just two communities, but two entirely separate nations. Then, in 1933, a student named Chaudhry Rahmat Ali gave this theoretical nation a name, Pakistan.
And wow, this slide really drives home just how bad things got. That number, 88, that was the total number of recorded communal riots across the country in just 4 years. between 1923 and 1927. That brief, golden period of harmony, it was officially over, replaced by a new reality of suspicion and violence.
All right, now we're getting to the absolute political tipping point. At this stage, the idea of a separate country was still kind of on the fringe, but a couple of major provincial elections were about to change, well, everything. So take a look at these election results from 1937. Even with the system of separate electorates in place, the Muslim League did pretty poorly. It only managed to win about a quarter of the seats that were specifically reserved for Muslims. This brought up a really serious question. Did the Muslim League actually represent the Muslims of India? But then, just 3 years later, the League completely flips the script. In 1940, they passed the now famous Lahore Resolution, and this is where they formally demand that the Muslim-majority areas in the northwest and the east of India should be grouped to form independent states. They used the experience of Congress rule in the provinces to argue that Muslim interests would never be safe in a united India. And they were smart about it. The resolution was a bit vague on whether this meant one single state or more, which gave them room to negotiate later. And this chart, this just shows you how incredibly successful that strategy was. In the elections of 1945-46, the Muslim League won a complete landslide. I mean, they took every single Muslim reserved seat in the Central Assembly and a huge majority in the provinces. The political ground had completely shifted. So what's the bottom line here? The 1945-46 elections were basically a referendum on the whole idea of Pakistan. The results gave the Muslim League an undeniable mandate. It validated their claim to be the one and only political voice for the majority of India's Muslims. So with that political mandate in their pocket and the lines clearly drawn, the path to independence and the path to partition became the exact same road. The final years were just this rapid downward spiral of failed talks and escalating violence. You know, those last-ditch British efforts, like the Cabinet Mission Plan, they just couldn't find a middle ground that both Congress and the League would agree to. Then, in August 1946, the Muslim League's call for direct action day to push for Pakistan descended into just horrific communal violence, especially in Calcutta. So early in 47, the last viceroy, Lord Mountbatten, shows up with a clear deadline: transfer power and do it fast. Seeing no other way out of the chaos, he presented his plan to partition British India. With violence spiraling out of control, both sides reluctantly agreed. And on August 15, 1947, that 4-decade journey ended with the creation of 2 independent nations. So when you look back at this whole story, this long, complicated chain of events, from a simple administrative decision in Bengal, to political deals, to massive electoral shifts, and finally, to widespread violence, you can't help but wonder, at what point did partition become inevitable? Could history at any of these crucial moments have taken a different path?